comes off from what I just said, and that is this idea of, and this will be short. This won't be a long one. I'm going to try to talk about three things before lunch. One, just this idea of forming a missional community covenant, because I think some of you guys have already asked questions about how do you get a group to go together on the same mission. Second, I want to talk about the organizational side of how do you lead, how do you share leadership, how do you create equipping that's more balanced, like Ephesians 4 talks about. And then if I have time, I'm going to talk a little bit just about hospitality. So that'll be before lunch. So you ready to go? So when I think about forming a missional community, and I'm going to, by the way, because I'm in a situation where I'm transitioning a church, I have about 35 missional communities, all of which were called community groups before I started. And a community group at the church that I took over was primarily a sermon discussion group. So it'd be a group of people who would meet once a week, talk about the sermon, and they were given very directive kind of like, here's what we want you to talk about. And I mean, that's fine. It's just I want to let you know what it was and what I stepped into. And there wasn't a lot of like, we really want you to come up with a plan or a strategy or a people that you're called to reach. In fact, at one point, and I know this because I met with the lead pastor over this topic. At one point, he was really clear that he wanted the groups to be primarily for the church people as a kind of retention strategy. So, because he knew that as you get to be a bigger church, and this was quite a big church at one point, that when you step into it, people, if they don't feel connected, will just kind of leave eventually. So he really wanted the groups to be a retention strategy for the church, that they'd feel like they had a real good, close group of friendships that would keep them there for the long haul. Again, not bad. Just so you hear, I'm not saying anything bad about that, but I just want to let you know what I walked into. And so we started calling them missional communities from the very beginning because I believe the indicatives precede the imperatives. So I'm like, you are a missional community if you're God's people, because you are called to be His people on mission together. And so we just call them that, even if they aren't on mission very well, even if they aren't living well as the family of God, loving one another well. But I'm reminding them that's who they are on a regular basis. And what I say now when we talk about forming new ones is that I say they've got to have called leaders that are qualified. So called and qualified leaders. And we'll come back to this in a second in terms of how I like the language of plural, by the way. Let me just encourage you, however you structure your church is how your church will be structured. And I know that sounds simple, but if you have kind of like a senior pastor model where the org chart of your church goes up to one person, then everything you do will repeat that same idea. So like if you go, like we have a one person at the top, then your groups will have one person leading the groups, and your ministries will have one person leading the ministries, and it'll be a one-person leadership model instead of a shared leadership model, a plurality of leadership. And I'm deeply, deeply convicted and convinced, absolutely convinced, that the Bible calls for a plurality of leadership, not a singularity of leadership. Absolutely convinced. And you can try your best to prove it from Scripture, and you won't. You will not disprove this because it's plural. It's just plural everywhere you go. Even at the Jerusalem Council, it's even plural in how they deal with the problem. You know, you've got James, Peter, you got me. It's a whole group of people wrestling with the issue of the Gentile believers and all that. So like I'm going to beat that drum like crazy. And so even as you think about leading a missional community, when I see a lot of people get in trouble in leadership of missional community, it's when they expect one person to do everything for the group. And it's like, sometimes it's a couple, husband and wife, and it's always at their house, and they're always providing the food, and they're always doing the leadership, and they're always doing the training, and you go, no wonder you're burnt out. You were not meant to do this by yourself. You were meant to do this as a team. Even the Apostle Paul, his worst time in his mission was in Athens when he was all alone. And he says, man, you need to send my team to me. Like he was not effective in Athens. He was very ineffective in that place, which is really ironic that most church planners use Athens to talk about how effective Paul was in contextualizing the gospel, which he did, but it's also the worst fruit, it's the least fruit he ever experienced. And they missed the fact that he was all alone. And so we need to do this together. So called and qualified leaders, ideally plural. And then a clarified mission. I encourage groups that are starting new missional communities to not start without the mission clarified. In other words, when you say, let's get a group of people together and then let's talk about what the mission should be, everybody shows up with their own pet peeve of what it should be, their own personal agenda. But when I say, hey, which I'm doing right now, I'm starting a new missional community because I'm in a new context, just moved, and I say, I had people come to me going, hey, we want to be in your missional community. I said, how do you know? And it was funny because the one lady said, well, because I'm sure yours will be really small and tight and totally devoted to just us. And I'm like, you don't know me, do you? I said, I'll be devoted to us, but I said, here's what our mission is going to do. We're going to reach the middle school that my kids attend and the neighborhood around it. So would you like to help us do that? And I said, second, it won't be small very long because we're going to reach a lot of people. And it'll probably multiply out several times, which means some of you might be joining another group as we send you out to start a new missional community. So would you like to be interested? Are you interested in that? She's like, not really. I said, okay, that's fine. Like, there's plenty other good missions that you could probably join. There's a lot of great missional communities that you could be a part of. But that's the one I'm going to do. And what that does is it helps me get the team that I need to be a core group on mission to those people. Because I can say at the front end, this is who we're trying to reach. So like I've even got some families moving to join me for the missional community. And literally they said, we want to move closer. We want to be a part of reaching that school. One of the women is a young single lady, and she said, I used to play volleyball. I could probably coach volleyball at the school. I think that's how I could engage in the mission, is I'll be a volleyball assistant coach or something, and then maybe your daughter would want to play volleyball, and then she and I could help reach the girls that play on the volleyball team. I'm like, bingo, you're thinking mission. That's what we want. So clarified mission, called leaders and qualified leaders, clarified mission, and then you want some called people in the group. And the order I found is necessary. Called, qualified, clarified mission, then a called people. And I'm talking about when I'm starting a new one. Because we got to make sure that they actually feel called to something. We got to make sure they're qualified. So we have an assessment process that we've developed that we can run leaders through to assess their qualifications and where they need to be developed. And I found that freaks some people out. I'm learning in my context because they're very sharp, very driven performance people. I'm on the east side of Seattle. A lot of them work for Microsoft or Amazon or other startups. And so they want to succeed. So they're like, tell me what I need to do to succeed. And so the idea of even an assessment freaked them out. In fact, they told me, like, is this a pass-fail thing? And I said, so we call it their development plan. And so it's to help us figure out where you need to be developed so we can actually put forward a development plan to help you grow as a leader. I said, it is a pass-fail if you don't believe the gospel, and like there's certain things, like I wouldn't put you in leadership if your marriage is falling apart or if you are questioning your faith right now or you're on the rocks in terms of your emotional health, but we wouldn't have you even go through an assessment if we knew that. So this is for you to be then developed. So we do that. And then it also includes, do you know what your mission is? And if they don't, I say, don't start recruiting a bunch of people until you get that figured out. Now, if you got a few friends that are going to figure it out together and you're going to pray together and seek a mission together, that might be your plural leadership team that's going to figure that out together. But if you just call a bunch of people and they don't know why they're showing up, it's just going to become a small group that's trying to figure out mission. It's going to become a Bible study that studies mission, but it won't actually get on mission. So called people. And then I just tell them, as you build your mission community, you start out by building it on the gospel, making sure they know what I taught last night, that the gospel is the power of God for salvation, past, present, and future. And then make sure they understand their new gospel identity, that they understand who they are in Christ in light of their baptism, because that's going to shape out how they live out that identity on mission in the everyday rhythms of life. So now, the rhythms of life like eating and celebrating, and you guys know this if you've listened to me teach already, so I'm not going to teach these today. Listening to the culture, listening to the story of God, there's a whole bunch of rhythms that I would encourage you to think through that people are already engaging in, but you engage them real intentionally. So, and so what I'll say is, like, make sure they know the gospel, they know their identity, family, servant, missionary, and then they live out that identity on mission in the everyday rhythms of life. That we eat together regularly, that we're listening to each other and getting to know each other's stories while we rehearse the story of God, so we're being equipped to share it. And as we get to know each other's stories, we'll know how to bless both those that are a family with us as well as those who are on the mission field that we're trying to love. And then as we see God do great things, we celebrate His grace amongst us through lots of parties. And then we make sure we take regular times to rest in the gospel and work hard for the sake of God's glory in all of life. So that's kind of how I would work a missional community process. Called leaders who are qualified and have a development plan for their ongoing development, clarified mission before they call a people, and then build those people up in the gospel and their new identity and clarify how they're going to live that out in the everyday rhythms of life. And so the reason why I said all this is because to me, this is how you form a missional community covenant. And if you don't like the word covenant, it just means agreement. Okay, it's just like it's a group of people saying, let's devote ourselves to something. And so for me, part of that process is I'll say, okay, we know who we're going to reach, Rose Hill Middle School. That's the one we're going after. We believe that we're family, servants, and missionaries to each other and to that place. So part of my process when I form a covenant is I'll say, let's spend 1 week talking about how we're going to love one another like family in the everyday rhythms of life. And we'll just process through that as a group. And I'll have someone scribe down everything they hear. Like people will say, I think we should eat together regularly. How often? Oh, I don't know. This happened in my group a few years ago. At least 3 meals a week. I said, everybody always together? And they said, well, maybe not. So then they said, how about one time together with all of us? How about one time where we serve someone else, whether it's we buy them lunch at work or we open a spot at our table at home to invite a neighbor over, or maybe it's we go on a double date together and we're just serving each other by being present with each other. And then how about one time with someone who doesn't know Jesus? It could be buying them a coffee or having lunch at work or having them over, but let's try 3 a week. That's what we agreed to. Now, I didn't put that on them. I just let our group talk it out, and they came up with that in light of our identities. And I said, okay. And then someone said, I think because we listen regularly to God in His Word and in prayer, I think as a family we should take time each time we do get together with a family meal to take time to listen to God for each other in prayer. Can we take a pause every time we get together and say, God, show us what each other needs. We'll just take a time of silence and listen to God. And we should make sure everyone's in a DNA group where they're listening to God in His Word. So, and this is my group. They just started making it up. And someone's scribing it all. And I said, okay, that's going to go out to you this week. If you didn't like what we said, then you have all week to say, I don't like it. Okay, but eventually we're going to agree on something. So we're going to do this for 4 weeks. And so family was week 1, servants was week 2, missionaries was week 3, and then week 4 was, okay, we've had 4 weeks to talk about what we're going to agree to together. Now let's put it in front of us, make sure we're clear about what we're saying we're committing to for the next year, and then let's begin to do our best. Now I've had some people go, I don't like the idea of making a covenant because we're going to fail. And I say, that's the whole good news of the new covenant. Like, of course we're going to fail. In fact, this is just an opportunity for you to say, what would we love God to do in through our lives? And we know we're going to need the grace because we're not going to do it perfectly. So this, even us saying, let's commit to this, requires you having a grace-filled culture to even agree because you already know you're going to fail. Right? I mean, even God says to Israel, remember when they go, we will keep it. And He goes, so when you don't, here's how you offer a sacrifice. He already knew they wouldn't keep the covenant, and He provided a means for them to be restored. And so I like leading people through this because I've observed that what happens is you find out why people are struggling in faith, why they're afraid to commit themselves, why they are too busy. I mean, all of the stuff that's keeping them from really living a vibrant life comes out in these 4 weeks pretty quickly.